politics. 2. In 1965, Richard Hofstadter, the recipient of 2 Pulitzer Prizes and holder of the DeWitt Clinton Professorship at Columbia University, was widely regarded as the most incisive and original historian of his generation, as he is still regarded today. Hofstadter's books and essays on American political history and on what he called political culture won him readers far beyond the Academy. Yet the respect of his demanding professional peers remained undiminished. Some critics tried to pigeonhole Hofstadter as a proponent of what was known as the consensus interpretation of American history, which became associated with a complacent, even conservative political outlook that denied injustice and vaunted national unity. Yet there was nothing complacent about either the man or his scholarship, and he cannot be labeled as a conservative. He had outgrown a youthful adherence to the Marxism that had led him to join, very briefly, the Communist Party, but he did not harbor the outrage and remorse that drove many disillusioned leftists far to the political right. He would include in the 1965 version of The Paranoid Style a blast at those ex-leftists who had moved from the paranoid left to the paranoid right, clinging all the while to the Manichaean psychology that underlies both. A restless, skeptical liberal intellect, he refused to trade one dogma for another, but rather became a mordant critic and deflator of all dogmas, in his politics as well as his historical writing. His aversion to doctrinaire thinking fed his curiosity about such thinking in American politics, and the combination propelled much of his best writing in the 1950s and 1960s, including the essays in The Paranoid Style. Ironically, Hofstadter came closest to presenting a consensus interpretation in an early work written firmly from the left. The American Political Tradition and the Men Who Made It, his second book, published in 1948, offered 12 biographical sketches of political leaders from the framers through Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and emphasized an enduring liberal consensus based on a common commitment to private property and the virtues of entrepreneurship among liberals and conservatives alike. Unlike many other young historians of the time, though, Hofstadter viewed this consensus with dismay, as an irrational evasion of social reality. Instead of celebrating what Daniel Boorstin later called the genius of American politics, he skewered what he described as sentimental political myths that sustained a delusory national accord. Hofstadter would modify his thinking on these matters, sometimes dramatically, over the coming years, but he would always be sharply attuned to the delusions and self-delusions of American politics in the present as well as the past. 3. The American political tradition established Hofstadter's reputation as a leader of a new generation of American historians. He had been preceded by Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., whose Age of Jackson, published in 1945, had toppled the prevailing progressive interpretation of Andrew Jackson's democracy as a Western movement against Eastern privilege. After him, in 1951, C. Van Woodward's Origins of the New South, 1877 to 1913, opened up an era of Southern history that most historians had thought held little interest, and offered startlingly fresh views about the history of populism and progressivism. Although these 3 scholars differed greatly in background, temperament, and style, Hofstadter, Schlesinger, and Woodward each wrote history with literary grace for a general audience, and not simply for their fellow historians. Each interpreted the past in order to shed light on important present-day issues. Each was a champion of liberal values against the extremes of left and right. Hofstadter's 2 major works from the 1950s and early 1960s, for which he received his Pulitzer Prizes, consolidated his renown as a historian and intellectual. In The Age of Reform, From Bryan to FDR, which appeared in 1955, Hofstadter fully embraced the New Deal as a sophisticated, cosmopolitan, and pragmatic effort to curb specific ills of modern American capitalism. But he also contrasted the New Dealers with the early populists and progressives.